Welcome to PHCPPros Behind the Wall podcast. I'm Ellen Rohr, plumber's wife, industry icon, and COO of Zoom Drain Franchising Company. With this podcast, our intention is to have real, thought-provoking conversations with people from across the PHCP industry. Of course, we want to entertain and encourage. Mostly, we want to connect and allow our guests to be vulnerable, to explore insights gained and lessons learned. Let's go behind the wall. Thanks, PHCP Pros, for sponsoring this opportunity for me to visit with my favorite people and, get behind the wall and find out a little bit more about what makes them tick, what makes you tick. Mark, I'm excited to share this time with you. You know, I love you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm humbled and grateful to be here.
I've watched you, we've been on some of the same stages. And one of the cool things about doing that is you get to sit in on someone else's seminar. How cool is that? And I always make it a point to listen to you. Your stories are great. Your history is amazing. And I really honor and respect how real and authentic you get with your audiences and with me. You've been nothing but generous when it comes to sharing what you've learned about educating people in our fine industry, and I'm appreciative of that. So let's learn a little bit about you. If I were to ask you, there's one thing about me making a bio, but if I were to ask you, how do you like to introduce yourself? Who are you? What would you say?
Well, I'm 5'19" and a half, vertically
You're a tall
gifted,
guy.
follically challenged. And I go to the barber and I say, "How about those Seahawks?" And 30 seconds later, he says, "Next." And I go to give him a tip, and he said, "No, I couldn't. That'd be stealing. Trim the ears," he means inside. I went to my 40-year high school reunion. This woman said, "You've lost some hair since high school." And I said, "That's a bald-faced lie. I have the same amount of hair I had in high school. It's just moved around a little. It's in my ears and my nose and on my back."
I hear you on that.
That's I started my career, Ellen, as an air conditioning and refrigeration technician in 1976. I was playing college basketball on a scholarship, and I had a 3.0 blood alcohol level. And as some of the people listening can probably relate to that. And after I got out of the military, I went through an apprenticeship. And beginning of my third year, I sold more service agreements and projects than the guy they hired full time. And my boss said, "I can't get anybody to sell like you do. Would you come into the office?" And I said, "Okay." So I went home all excited that night to tell my wife, I was going to have a real job. I wasn't going to be a technician anymore. I was going to wear slacks and a sweater. And she said, "That's nice, but you've never finished anything you've ever started. You have one more year, finish your apprenticeship. The job will be there." And I hate it when my wife is right, but she was. And so I did. And sure enough, she was right. And the job was there, and I took it, and nothing's been the same since.
And so, and by the way, you've been married a long time.
41 years. Yeah.
41 years. How did you meet your wife?
Oh, gosh. Well, how I met your mother story. I was working, I just gotten out of the Air Force, and I was working at a record store, and she came in, and when the door opened, there was a rainbow and some doves, so I knew something special was going to happen. And so after a while, I could tell she was kind of looking my way, so I went over and started talking to her, and I sold her a record. And she paid by check, and so I circled the phone number. I said, "Now I have your number," and she blushed. And like a schmuck, Ellen, I don't call her because I didn't think she'd go out with me. I didn't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out of. So 3 days later, she comes back in the store, and this time I asked her out to the Hall & Oates concert because she'd bought one of their albums from me.
Oh, good choice.
So the manager schedules me to work that night, so I don't get to go. So my sister goes on the first date with my future wife.
No.
And since I was living at my sister's at the time, driving her Pinto, I was...
With the rear exploding gas tank?
How it went. Yes. And she launches into a concert review. I said, "Sue, I don't care about that. What's this girl like?" She goes, "I don't know what she sees in you. I've known all your other girlfriends. Who knows? But if you don't marry this one, you're an idiot." And that was November of 79.
That is an adorable story. So she's been with you throughout your career.
Yes.
Now, tell me how you would define yourself right now, and then we're going to go backwards again. But as right now, what is it that you intend to do? You wake up every day, and how is it that you are of service? How would you define what you're currently doing in this industry or in your career?
I'm an author. I've written 5 books, and I'm just finishing up book number 6. Actually, this morning I finished my first edit on book number 6. So I'm an information entrepreneur. I do about 75 keynotes a year prior to COVID. I'm a publisher, but I'm also a podcaster as well, like you. And so, I do a lot of workshops, a lot of seminars. About 60% of my work is in the mechanical contracting industry. Fujitsu sponsors my podcast, so that gives you an idea. Let's see. I've done a ton of work outside the industry as well, with companies like Microsoft and Aflac and T-Mobile and ConocoPhillips and John Deere, because of the success of the books.
What is it that makes you want to share this information? Like, what burning itch do you have that makes you feel like this has to come out of you based on your experience? Like, what motivates you to put out this information?
Well, I'm on a mission to get people to grow and learn. And my publisher said to me, you'll be the same person in 5 years, except for two things: the books you read and the people you associate with. And so I named my podcast Mark Matteson on Books and People, because I'm on a mission to help people become the best version of themselves, figure out what you want in life and learn how to ask for it. So I've been teaching people to set goals for, 25 years.
One of the things I like about you is that you don't limit your conversations to, HVAC or the technical trades, but you talk about the journey you've had with your health. And as a recovering person, that's something I like to bring up sometimes, because I know that other people like to, I don't know if they like it. I just feel like there's more to our lives than just showing up at work every day, and that
Yes.
we bring our whole selves to the party. And you've been someone who's been, the book you wrote about getting fit and losing weight was a really, it is a freedom from fat. It's a really vulnerable take about some. I see all these young technicians with old man diseases, man, and it has a lot to do with how they're eating. And I hate to be a nudge. I think the way you talk about it is just so humble and compassionate that it makes it easy to hear this story from you. So tell me about, some of the messages. It's not just like how to fix things or how to even sell things. It's really how to live a better life.
Well, the thing was, there's an old expression: middle age is when you're broad mind and narrow waist trade places, right? So what had happened was I'd gained 5 pounds a year for 10 years. And this happened in the 2000s. And all of a sudden I was fat guy in a little coat. I was 305 pounds and I had a 46-inch waist. And I was in Boston doing some training with a contractor, and I stepped on a scale and it said 305. And I said, that can't be. The scale must be broken. So then I put my hand on the counter and I eased up on the scale to trick it into thinking it was someone else. And it said 306. And I went, dope. So then I went to the front desk and I said, do you have a tape measure? And I put it around my waist and it said 46. And then I went 45 and a half. So then I went back to my room and I took my shirt off and I did something I do not recommend. I took a picture of myself front side. When the police arrest you, I'm told, they take 2 pictures front side. So I arrested myself with my shirt off, and I looked at the picture and I went, I was fat guy in a little coat. So I sat down and I wrote out a goal. I feel great at 248 with a 36-inch waist. I love to work out and eat clean. And I made 5 copies of that goal and I put it everywhere. And then along the way, I started interviewing men and women who had lost the weight and kept it off. And I mean middle-aged men and women, not 25-year-olds saying things like, I can eat anything I want.
Yeah.
And after a while, some trends started to emerge. And it turned out there were 3 things that I needed to do: portions, quality, exercise. So I cut my portions in half. I stopped eating bread. I started walking every day. And abracadabra, I lost like 20 pounds, just like that. And I went, wow. So I kept going on this path, and I eventually joined a club. I started lifting. I started swimming, doing some other things. And within a year, about 14 months, I lost 50 pounds and 10 inches off my waist, and I've been able to keep it off. Now, COVID has reared its ugly head, and I've added about 8 pounds of COVID cushion. But I'm going to go to the gym tonight. So
I've heard it called the COVID-19.
Yes.
Like 19, the extra 19 pounds.
19 pounds I don't need. Yeah.
So, but then you talked about that journey and that experience, which, you don't have to. So what makes you be so open and authentic and vulnerable to people? What compels you to share so much?
There's a quote by John Legend in the documentary Spike Lee did about Michael Jackson called Off the Wall. And he said, every hit song has 2 qualities: personal and universal. And so the stories I tell are personal and universal. In other words, if I touch your heartstring and I somehow get inside your head and I make you laugh, cry, or think, and if I do that by using self-effacing story or a time that I screwed up, there's a tendency for you to be more open-minded about the message I'm trying to share. And so I use a lot of self-effacing humor. One of my clients said, "I really like your self-defecating humor." And I said, "That's a shitty thing to say, but I think I get what you're saying." Bless his heart.
Kapow, pow.
Oh
Exactly.
my gosh.
Well,
Honestly, that really happened. And so
I love it.
I use the self-effacing humor because it's the fastest way to build a bridge between my head and your heart. And then once you open up your heart, then I have a pretty good chance of getting through with one of my stories, because every story I tell has a very specific point. So people think that it's just, I'm just improvising the whole time, and I'm not. I plan, like you, I plan my presentations well in advance. I tailor them to the audience, but I also allow time for improv. And one of the things I do is something I call CIA, compliment, introduction, ask. And invariably, and you know this, especially in a group of contractors, I do a lot of work with distributors, and there's always the early bird that comes with his wife, and he's in his mid-50s, and I'll walk up to him and say, "It's nice you brought your daughter with you," right?
Ooh.
And oh yeah, and then she like blushes and smiles and goes, "Oh, I like this one a lot. Is he the speaker?" And and then the Manny that gets mad or he thanks me, one of the two, and then I say, "Where did you guys meet?" Right? And so I start with a compliment. If the guy's there by himself and he's an older guy, but he has a bunch of hair, I'll say, "Wow, you have way too much hair for a guy your age," right? Which every man who has a lot of hair is all, and since I don't, I said, I'm jealous. That's the
nice
compliment.
to notice. Yeah.
Then the introduction, I say, "Hi, I'm Mark Matteson. I'm the speaker today. I'm just curious, how did you guys meet?" And now I'm having a conversation with him, and everybody loves to tell how I met your mother story.
I
right?
love that story too. Yeah, I do.
Right.
I always like to know. Yeah, there's good stories.
So compliment, introduction, ask. And then I say, "So where are you guys from? And what business are you in? What do you guys do? How many employees do you have?" And in the span of about 2 or 3 minutes, I've made 2 really good friends. Now, here's what's fascinating. This is just a curious byproduct of this approach. That couple is almost always the first one to get in line after my talk to buy one of my books. Now, that wasn't my intention. It's just an observation. But they're also, and Ellen, you know this, you need to find a fun face, a caring face, a friend face in the audience to talk to. And so I have this couple. And since I get there an hour before my presentation, I usually have 4 or 5 people who are friends of mine before my presentation even starts. And so
that makes such a difference.
It's huge. So CIA is a really simple thing to remember and a really fun thing to do. And it's one of those ways you can turn strangers into friends in just a few minutes.
I love that. That's so practical. There are, maybe you, dear listener, are thinking that maybe for the next phase of your career arc, you might share what you know. Dan Holohan refers to the dead men. He said, it's too bad. Some of the guys who built these awesome systems are dead now, and we don't know why they did what they did or how they did it or how they sold it. And that resonates with me and a lot of other people. Like, what if you, before you died, started to pass on all of what you've learned? And I think that your suggestion here is such a nice way, not only to make friends if you are going to a party or you're in a working situation or a sales situation, but also if you want to expand your career as perhaps a speaker. So you are a student of the game. I can tell by just the way you are, I've seen you present and how professional and prepared you are. So who are some of the mentors in your life or the people in your life that either saw something in you or gave you something to aspire to? Go back to some of those early mentors and share what they meant to you and how they shaped you.
Yes, 2 come to mind immediately. The first was Bob Moat. I met him when I was 14. He came to our high school to speak. I was a sophomore, and I was so taken by his message. I approached him afterwards and said, "Is there more?" And he said, "Yes." And then he handed me a brochure, Action for Excellence, 2-day seminar, $45, Super Bowl weekend, 1971. So I went home and said to my mom, "I've got to go to this seminar." And she said, she was British. She goes, "This seminar, love, you're 14. How are you going to get there?" And I said, "I'm going to need you to drive me and write a check." But I said, "I'll promise I'll pay you back. I'll pay you back, Mom." She goes, "Fine, love, get in the car. Let's go." So I went to this seminar and I took 50 pages of notes, and it literally changed my life. I went from scrub to star on the basketball team in about 6 weeks. I went from a 1.8 to a 3.8 with my grades in one semester using these principles of goal achievement that Bob taught. Well, then I got to hear Bob speak 2 more times before I graduated from high school, and it just further cemented these principles into my life. Well, fast forward, now I'm 34. I'm this brand new salesperson at a commercial HVAC service company. And guess who's coming to dinner? I mean, it's Bob Moat. He's speaking at the Chamber of Commerce in Seattle. So I went down there. Here he was all these years later, except now he's this world-class international speaker. And I was taken right back to the things he taught me. And then we reconnected after the meeting, and he wooed me for about a year and finally convinced me to leave the industry and go to work for him for 4 years. And so I got to work closely with Bob and heard him speak, hundreds of times. So whenever I'm speaking, I'm channeling a lot of what Bob taught because he was my first speaking mentor. He literally
what did it mean to him when you found him when you were 34? Tell me about, like, hey, Bob, it's me, Mark.
Like no time had passed, and we picked up right where we left off. Now, I remember when I was 14, so he asked me about grades. He said, so what's your GPA? And I said, well, it's a 1.8. And he said, let me ask you something. He said, how long have you been on this basketball team, not counting today? He said, I think one of the goals you need to set is I love homework. I enjoy a 3.2 GPA. I said, really? Why? He said, because if you don't have the grades, you're not going to be able to play. Not just in high school, but beyond, if that's your dream. And I said, it is. He said, so let's go to work on the academic part of it as well. And so he had me write out a goal that said, I love homework. Right. And I'll never forget that. And so, I affirmed that goal 4 or 5 times a day. And 30 days later, I followed Katie McDivitt, the smartest girl in our school, into the library because I'd never been in there. And there she was sitting with 7 other girls and the valedictorian, one dude, the guy with the tape on his glasses. And I said, hey, Katie, what's up? And the librarian went, shh. And I was like, oh, sorry. And then I tiptoed over and I go, what's going on? And she goes, sit down, you're in our class. And then she walked me to my locker, or I walked her to her locker, and she took the books out of the locker. I thought lockers were for storage.
They came out?
Then she said, Mark, you got to organize your stuff. And she showed me her binder and her notebook. And she said, Mark, when you get an assignment, do it right away. Do it that night. I go, you don't wait till Sunday night? She goes, no, you do it that night. And she literally showed me the how over the next couple of weeks. And sure enough, abracadabra, I had a 3.2 the next quarter, and then a 3.8, and I had a 3.8 in college.
I thought of something that you said too when Bob talked to you. Jim Rohn said this, that one of his mentors would say, let's set a goal, like get on the same side of the table. Yes. We're doing this to get, what a small shift when we're trying to coach someone or hoping to encourage someone to greater performance, to be in on it.
Yes. It's plural. It's let's, as in let us together.
You and me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
not what you should insight. Do is, yeah.
Jim Rohn was one of my mentors. I heard him speak in '94. I bought $400. I bought everything he had. I listened to all his stuff for years. I watched his videos. I read his books. I listened to his audios hundreds of times. The other mentor I had was Charlie Tremendous Jones. When I wrote this book, Freedom from Fear.
Oh, that's good the way you're doing that. Yeah.
Yes. It was just
I don't know if you can see that in your podcaster, but he's pointing to his books as he knows where they are.
Back up there it is right there.
He's got eyes in the back of his head.
So I mailed the manuscript to Charlie. I just thought he was this famous speaker. And I knew he'd written a book. So I just wanted his opinion. And he calls me 2 weeks later and he says, this is how he talked. He goes, tremendous, Mark. He goes, if you can write another book like that, you won't need to speak anymore. And I said, excuse me? And he said, I want to publish it. And I said, you're a publisher? He said, what do you think Executive Books is, an underwear store? So that was the beginning. And I said, well, how does this work? He goes, well, I'm going to print 10,000 copies and I'm going to give you 1,000 to sell in the back of the room. And I said, the back of what room? And he said, well, when you speak. And I went, right, like I knew, right? So Charlie taught me the book business. And between Charlie Tremendous Jones and Bob Moat, they literally changed my life.
Well, that brings up something that's really been instrumental in my life. I didn't realize how accessible these heroes of mine were. And I reached out to them with no expectation that anyone would call me back. My mentor, Frank Blau, I wrote a letter and then he called me up and told me where my head was and dressed me down. And it was exactly what I needed at that time. But, these People are so generous. Nobody achieves success on their own, and chances are very good that the people you admire are going to welcome your phone call. Yes. You know, they might need to reschedule if you caught them in the middle of something, but they do want to share, and people have helped them, and they're honor bound to continue to help. It's why I am so excited about these conversations in this podcast, because I want to share, you know, my friendships with people so they can benefit from them.
Well, you talked about Frank Blau, and for you, he was a Dutch uncle. Dutch uncles are the guys and gals who tell you the truth.
Yeah.
You know, they say, look, you know, I had one guy, John Lucas was that way, the former NBA player and coach. I hadn't seen John in years, and I'd gained all this weight. And the first thing he said to me was, Mark, start running again. Right? It wasn't, how's Debbie? How are the kids? It was, start running again. Right? We need Dutch uncles in our lives to tell us the truth.
That's such an important thing to do, you know, to be willing to come to that, and even if they get mad at you, to be willing to speak truth to someone who might need it, like to be brave enough. Yeah, to be brave enough to do it, because if you're coming from a place of love, you might be the only person who does it. How many people have we seen where you think there's nobody around him telling him the truth? There's no one around there, you know, around that person confronting that bad behavior, and look at
there's a story about that. It's called The Emperor with No Clothes On.
Yeah,
the Emperor in his new clothes, right?
Yeah, everybody, oh yeah, you look great.
Yeah,
I'm not going to tell him.
It's a 7-year-old girl that goes, he's naked. It's a terrible story.
Well, now if we go way back to 14, I would say most 14-year-olds would not, maybe the other kids in your class did not respond to Bob the way you did.
I was the only one.
Like, where did you find that spark? Just like to recognize in ourselves, but also maybe to recognize in another 12-year-old or 10-year-old in our lives. What was different about you?
2 years before that, I'd been cut from the 8th grade basketball team. So there was that. And so I'd set a goal to make the team the next year. I didn't write it down. I didn't know to do that before I met Bob, but that was my burning obsession, was to make the team the next year. So I went to the best player I knew. His name was Kenny Christensen, and he was scoring 20 points a game. And man, he was good. And so I said, Kenny, how did you get so good? And he said, I shoot 2 hours every day, and I go to Bob Huberg's basketball camp. Well, so I did. So I got a brochure from him, and I earned the money to go to camp, and the next July I went. Well, unbeknownst to me, there was this piano playing, joke telling coach named Bob Moad, the same guy, except he'd won a state championship, and he was one of the guest coaches. So, you know, I met Bob, but I didn't realize it at the time. So that seed was planted. Well, then the next year I made the team, and because of all the hard work, and I grew 9 inches. That didn't hurt. And then by the end of the season, I was starting, but my sophomore year rolled around, and I was looking for something else. I was looking for an edge. I was working what I thought was, you know, a couple hours a day was a pretty good commitment of time to practice. And so along comes Bob, this former state championship coach that I'd met at the camp before. And so we already had this kind of primal connection through basketball, right? So when the student's ready, the teacher shows up, and that's what happened with Bob. And Bob kind of took me under his wing, because I heard him speak 3 times in 2 years. And so fast forward all those years later, we picked up right where we left off. Except now I was this hotshot sales guy. You know, I worked with Bob for 4 years, and we used to go to basketball games together. And long after I left and went out on my own, we stayed in touch right up until the day he died.
Was that traumatic? Because sometimes, you know, you have a mentor and you may outgrow that mentor, or it might be just a time in your life to change direction. And how did that transition go to go out in your own?
I remember about 6 months before he died, I was on my way to the Soaring Eagle Casino in Central Michigan to talk to a bunch of pork dealers, right? Okay. And I'm in the middle of nowhere, right, in this rental car, and the phone rings, and it's Bob, and he goes, "Hey, I just went on your website." He goes, "That's amazing." He goes, How did you do that? I need to get a website," he says to me. And I said, well, just call my friend Kevin Thomas, you know, he'll hook you up. And so we talked for a while, and it was great. And I said, "Bob, you know, I'd love to have lunch when I get back. I've been traveling every week. Sorry I haven't been able to connect with you for a while." Well, then I found out that he passed away a few months later, and I was literally on the road when his funeral happened. So I was really sad. So I grieved his loss for a long time. But Bob's still alive, because some of the stories I tell and some of the insights I share came directly from him. So, He's still alive because as long as I keep telling stories about Bob, then there's a great quote. We die twice, once when we finally pass, and the second time when people stop talking about us. And that's from this book.
Freedom
Right?
from pain.
Yeah, I love that quote because it's really true. Someone's still alive as long as we're telling their stories.
I'm reading, have you read the book It's Your Ship by Michael Abrashoff, the commander
I know
of
the one
the
you mean. I have
Benfold?
not, but I've heard a lot of people talk about it.
It's terrific, and I read it a few years ago. It really hit me, and now as a group at Zoom Train, we're doing a leadership class based on the book. And he has an expression that your leadership will be gauged not by what you accomplished in the time span that you were the leader of the ship or the company, but on the impact you had on the people who were under your care. And so as they develop and move and grow, that's where your legacy is really made, and that it's fair to weigh in on as to whether or not you were a great leader. Like, you might want to hold up a minute before you make that decision, and let's see what the lasting impact of your influence has been. And I thought that was really beautiful and kind of a counterpoint to what you're sharing today. So Mark, tell us about a mistake. Like, where did you go way off track? And then how'd you get back? I mean, find one particular one that, like, it might have been, I always believe the worst things become the best things by and by, but that journey is sometimes worth sharing. So let's hear one of yours.
Well, when I first started I was working for Bob, and I was marketing like crazy. I was working 14-hour days, and I finally got connected with the sales manager for Harley Davidson. And so I was all excited. And so Bob had these workbooks that also had cassettes on the inside, right? So it was a way to kind of review the material in the curriculum. And so I told this guy, I said, look, I'll mail you a copy of the package, and I'll send it to you overnight. And once you review it, then we can talk about you coming to one of the seminars, because the whole idea was to get somebody to come to these 2-day seminars, and then hopefully their company would adopt the process. And that's essentially what I was selling.
Right.
So not only did I misspell the guy's name, but I clicked the wrong box. I checked the wrong box. It said bill recipient. And so he gets this package, but I misspelled his last name, and he had to pay for it. And so he calls me the next day, and he said, "You're an idiot." He said, "Don't ever call me again. If you're not smart enough to spell my name or check the right box, there's no way I'm going to invest in any education that you're selling." Click. And he hung up. I'll never forget that as long as I live. And that's a kind of a minor little example of a time that I sliced in the woods. But now I double or triple check the spelling and the pronunciation of someone's name before I ever, mail a book or sign one to them or whatever. So yeah, that was a painful lesson, because I'd worked for weeks on that particular opportunity only to have it be dashed on the rocks.
It is interesting how, just keep going back to basics. I went to Zoom the other day and mangled people's names. They have masks on, which didn't help, but I should have just taken a minute, to remind myself who was who before I walked into a meeting and just blew it. And I just thought, of all the credibility I built up with my own team, I really stepped in it, and it was embarrassing to me. Like, I'm supposed to be your champion. I can't even remember your name. And it was, I thought, gosh, what's more important than that?
If you don't choose humility, you get humiliation.
Yeah. And I keep thinking, the older I get, that aren't some of these lessons behind me, but man, they seem to have one a week that gets my attention.
Well, I'm constantly amazed at how stupid I was 2 years ago, and the cycle keeps repeating.
So what is the best tool in your toolkit? What is it that, because I think sometimes too, at my age, there's certainly things that I can improve on. And like I've set a goal now that I should know every person's name on my team. I should know what they want, have had that conversation with them and be sure that they know who I am and I know who they are. Even if I travel a lot and I don't see everybody every day, that's no excuse. So that's one of the things I could work on. But there are other things that I'm not good at that I feel in this point in my life, I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to surround myself with people who are better at that than me, and I can run with my strengths. Given that, what would you run with? What is something that you uniquely bring to a situation that you have as a tool in your toolbox, a gift you have to share?
Well, I had a mentor say to me, have you ever studied active listening and read any Carl Rogers? And I said, no. He said, that's obvious. And there's more to that story than, than I'm telling, but that was enough for now. And so, but I respected this gentleman, and he was one of Bob's business partners, and he was a brilliant consultant. His name was Bill Cole. Pretty sure he's not alive anymore either. But I spent the next year reading everything I could find on active listening. And so I taught myself first how to actively listen. And what I started out by writing on a little card that said, I dominate the listening in every conversation and people enjoy being around me. And then I proceeded to study and learn active listening. And there's 4 steps to it that I teach: listen, pause, question, paraphrase. And so when somebody's actively listening to you, what's the proof? What's the evidence? How do you know that they're listening? They're nodding, they're smiling, they're taking notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pause 3 to 5 seconds. Here's how long that is. And here's what's fascinating. When I get to 4, you start talking again 80% of the time.
Yeah.
And then question for clarification. How do you mean? Can you give me an example? You think you know what they're saying until you ask those questions, and then they tell you another story and you go, oh. And then finally at the end, you paraphrase. So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is you got 9 pounds of coffee in a 5-pound can. And they say exactly. Now that process is so simple, but it's so hard to do because most people don't listen. They just don't.
Mm-mm.
But when you get in the habit of actively listening, so I play this little game on airplanes. Okay. I wonder if I can get my seatmate to talk for 20 or 30 minutes without them knowing they've been doing all the talking. And I win every time. So I'm on this flight from Minnesota to Seattle, and I'm sitting in first class, and this woman gets on, and I could tell by the look on her face, it's like, don't even talk to me. I'm like, okay. And I'm reading the body language. So I put my headphones on and I'm reading a book, but then the meal comes, and that's the time to talk to your seatmate, right? So I said, is Seattle your final destination? Harmless question. She said, yeah, I'm going home. I said, great. What do you do, if you don't mind me asking? She goes, I'm the HR director for Trident Seafoods. I said, really? How did you get started in that business? For the next 2 hours, she talked, and I listened. And then finally, the captain said, please put the fence in the upright position. So I was like, oh, she goes, oh my God. She goes, I've been talking for the last 2 hours. She goes, what do you do? And without getting out of my seat, I reached up and grabbed Freedom from Fear, and I handed it to her. She goes, oh my gosh, you're an author. And I said, well, among other things. I said, I do workshops and seminars and keynotes. And she goes, give me your card. I said, I just did. The book was my card. And I said, all my contact information's in there. So about 3 months later, she called, and I ended up facilitating a meeting. All of her managers came down from Alaska. It's the largest seafood company in the world, right? $2 billion company. And I listened my way into that relationship. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten new business because I just didn't talk. I listened, and then I listened some more. But I don't think that would work in Utah where you're headed. But it's great here in Washington where I live.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that one. That's so good. And just let's go. It's listen, pause, ask questions,
Question,
and
paraphrase.
Question, paraphrase.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of really practical ways to be better at relationships, at sales, at living your life. And I noticed that you like the repetition of writing and goal setting. This is old school. I came across a W. Clement Stone YouTube video the other day, and he created a multi-billion-dollar company. And part of his story is Napoleon Hill studied the smartest businessman, according to his idea of who the smartest business people were. He studied them, including Andrew Carnegie. And then he wrote the book, Think and Grow Rich. And he laid out, this is what the smartest business people do, according to me in my studies. And then W. Clement Stone was a student of Napoleon Hill.
He was.
And the power of repetition and mantras and writing those affirmations and rewriting your goals, it reminded me that's so old school and it's so evergreen. And that seems to be one of your key practices.
It is. Going all the way back to what Bob taught me way back when. And here's the thing, it's repetition, emotion, and time, RET, okay? Think about this. I ask my audiences, how many of you can recite the Pledge of Allegiance? And anybody over 40 can say yes, right? I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America. I mean, everybody knows that. I'm not sure the kids do now, but then I say, finish this sentence, 2 all beef patties, special sauce, and the audience
lettuce,
goes,
cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
there it is. I said, now McDonald's got inside your head just like the administrators of your school did with the Pledge of Allegiance, except you didn't give them permission or you didn't even know it happened. And it happened because of repetition, emotion, and time. Okay, which is brilliant. So here's my question. What if you wrote your own ad campaign in the form of an affirmation or a goal? And what if you said it thousands of times until it became part of your DNA, like the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Because that's all we're talking about is repetition, emotion, and time. And when you do that, what it does is it changes your thermostat setting, right? It changes your self-image. And now all of a sudden, you start throwing yourself out of your comfort zone. You start reading books you didn't read before. You start interviewing and talking to mentors that you never would have called before. And the next thing you know, you have all the knowledge, attitude, skills, and habits that you need to achieve your goals. First, I work on my goals, and the goals work on me. And that's what W. Clement Stone taught. Those two co-authored a book that I read called PMA. That was the Positive Mental Attitude.
Positive mental attitude.
Yeah, and I reread that book just recently. And here's what's fascinating. W. Clement Stone's lineage, he mentored so many people. Jack Canfield and Alan Weiss are two of his mentees. Those guys are in their 70s now. They're mentors of mine, right? So indirectly, I'm like the grandson of W. Clement Stone. And, I read all of his books. I've immersed myself I'm dipping my bucket in the same well you are, because Napoleon Hill interviewed 500 of the most successful people in the world because Andrew Carnegie gave him the list of those people and said, talk to these guys. It's going to take you 20 years to learn this. And after 20 years of research, in 1935, he wrote Think and Grow Rich, which, if you've not read that book, it'll change your life. Or it's two.
Oh, those two as well. Mark, you're very good at making sure that people know how to continue to get information from you. So we've got a few more things to do before we get off the phone. I wish we could talk for hours and hours, and we'll do
another one.
We'll do another one. And I just so enjoy your company. So I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. And then, of course, I want you to let everyone know how to get a hold of you. What is happiness to you? Like, when you stop and realize, I am just happy right now, what are you doing? What's happening in your life?
There's an old quote from Abraham Lincoln that I love. I plucked a thistle and planted a rose where I thought it would grow. And so what I've tried to do the last 25 years is pluck thistles and plant roses. And when I can coach or mentor or help someone, either through, live presentations like this or my books, if someone sends me an email or calls me up or sends me a text saying your book changed my life, that's why I do what I do. I love what I do. I love people. And I've been a coach most of my life. I've been a teacher most of my life. Look, I'm a year at junior college and I flunked high school English. Okay. So it's not like I have a master's degree in English from Harvard. I don't. But nobody told me that I couldn't write, so I just did. Right. And there's something magical. See, books are forever. Books are eternal. And you know that, Ellen. You've written 3 or 4 of them, right? And you're probably going to write some more before you go. I just finished my 6th book this morning. I finished the first edit. I've got a lot of work to do still.
Yay, you.
2 questions that everybody should ask themselves, right? And so I want to make a difference in the world. I want to, quote Steve Jobs, put a dent in the universe, right? And so what makes me happiest is when somebody reads a book or attends a seminar or workshop and they get the tools to accomplish the things they want to, and then they tell me about it. They circle back around. Sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it's 5 years later, but invariably I get an email or a text or a letter or a phone call saying, your information changed my life. And that's why I do what I do. I love what I do. I'm self-employed. When I call in sick, I know I'm lying. I'm the worst boss I ever had. I was writing an article for Contracting Business, right? And I'm sitting in this coffee shop one Sunday and I was writing away. I had my headphones on. And this woman taps me on the shoulder and she goes, "Excuse me, are you working on a Sunday?" And I said, "It's Sunday?" That should tell you everything.
How long had you been there?
Matteson.
Since Friday? Okay, here's my last question, which wasn't going to be my last question, but it is now. Of those 52 questions, what question would you like to leave our dear listener today?
What do you really, really, really want in
Oh my
life and
gosh, that is
business?
my favorite question.
And do you have the nerve to ask for what you want?
What a
Right?
good
So there's two
follow-up.
things. What do you really, really want? And have you taught yourself how to ask for what you want?
I think it was Mark Victor Hansen, maybe Jack Canfield's buddy, who said that you want to put those real. Oh, it was Wayne Dyer. Said you want to put the extra realies in there, not just what do you want. Oh well, I want to take a Sunday off.
Really,
What do you
really,
really, really want? To dig in a little deeper and be willing to sit with that question for a minute. And are you? What was the verb you used? Do you have the nerve? Do you have the nerve
to
to
ask
ask?
what you want.
That just gave me like goosebumps, that it's going to take a little courage. It might take a little bravery on your part to actually ask for help. What I've been realizing too is that as much as I talk about the importance of pushing things down the org chart, energizing the team, I have found myself in situations recently where someone's offered to help. And I've almost been like, no, do I look like I'm overwhelmed? Am I not keeping up? Am I like resisting that I asked, this is what I've asked for in my life and it's coming to me. Why not just say, yes, please? Right. So that was kind of a recent awareness that I've even had about it, ask for the help that you need it and then be willing when it shows up to say, yes, please. And thank you for
Yes.
showing up. You don't have to do all this yourself. And
It's an
you have
aha.
inspired me. That's an aha. Man, you have inspired me. Let's now talk about,
Well, okay,
how we
so
get a hold of you.
let's stay with what you just said for a minute. So in this
Okay.
book, A Simple Choice, I quote J.C. Penney. He said the turning point in his business career came when he realized he couldn't do it all himself, that he had to delegate. And so what I heard you say just then is you gave yourself permission to delegate and accept help, which is hard for some leaders. You and I have been in lots of rooms with lots of small contractors who say things like, if you want it done right, you got to do it yourself. Well, guess what, pal? You're never going to earn more than $500,000 a year in your business if you're doing it all yourself. Until you learn how to delegate, figure out what you're really good at and delegate your weaknesses, you're not going to go to the next level with your business.
100%. You are so wise and wonderful and funny and I just love you so much. So thanks for going behind the wall with us at PHCPPros.
Well, let me just quote one last quote to you, and this is from Zig Ziglar, and you remember Zig.
I do.
He was a bit of a secular pastor, and he would say, "It really is true. You can have everything you want. I mean, everything you want if you're just helping up other people get what they want first."
That's a pretty good impression of
I
Zig.
know, but it's such a great insight.
It is 100%. And I use that quote a lot because it keeps you, we both can win here. We both can win here. And that's a good, let's help each other, So, okay. Now steer everyone to your site.
Okay. www.sparkingsuccess.net. If you just Google my name, Mark Matteson, Matteson, I come up the first 11 or 12 times. I'm the easiest guy in the world to get a hold of. I do a podcast. You can sign up for that. It's free. You can subscribe to it. I also have an electronic newsletter that goes out once a month. That's also free. About 7,000 people take advantage of that every month.
Nice.
You can call me, old school, 206-697-0454. Or you can just start banging a drum and chanting my name, and I'll probably just appear.
You will too. And I'll be seeing you soon. We're going to pick up on this podcast conversation. I thank you so much. And thanks for listening to Behind the Wall podcast. Thanks, PHCPPros. We're out.